So I'm going to give you a little bit, am I too loud? I'm going to give you a little bit more information about, a little more practical, hands-on information about the Common Core state standards and how we're moving forward in Washoe County School District. So the Common Core were authored and really invented, sort of came together through the National Governors Association and the Council for School Chiefs, which is the superintendent from every state. And this is really their quote about the Common Core state standards, and really just talks to us about what the purpose is and why we did it. So, you know, a lot of people are saying, well, why are we doing this? Why did we adopt these? Well, as a former math teacher myself, I can tell you that the math standards are so much better than what we have in Nevada now. But beyond that, here's some other reasons. You know, transiency is a big thing in Nevada. People move in and out. And so no matter where you go, if you were to pack up your car and move to North Carolina tomorrow, the idea is that your students would be learning the same content in North Carolina as that they learn in Nevada. They might not be in the same place, you know, because there's always that going on. But the idea is that they would be responsible for the same standards and the same grade level, which is really exciting for those people that tend to move around. They're modeled on success. So what they did is they took the best standards from states and places and looked at them and said, you know, what are things that students need to know in order to be career and college ready? And so that's how the standards ended up in the document. They're based on college and career readiness. So they looked at what a student should look like when they go to college, and then kind of back-mapped those. And also included real life skills in there. So there's a lot of the 21st century skills that Mary was talking about earlier embedded in the Common Core standards, and I'll show you some examples of that in just a minute. In Washoe County, we have a huge remediation rate. When our students go to UNR and TMCC, many of them, a lot of them, I don't remember the exact percentage, but it's pretty high, need remedial math and English language arts as they go on to college. And so the idea is that if taught these standards, it catapults them right into college level credit-bearing courses. The cool thing is because every state's on the same page, every state is being responsible for the same materials or the same content, that there's more materials. There's better professional development, there's better books, there's better resources for students and teachers to work from. So that's really exciting, and also better learning opportunities for professionals. And an example is when I was a senior in high school, I knew I was going to be a teacher from a very early age. In my, I think, 5th grade, I decided I was going to be a math teacher for some reason. And I was talking to my physics teacher in high school, and he said, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, I'm going to be a teacher. And he said, well, where are you going to go to college? And I said, oh, I'm going to go to Berkeley. I'd been on a science field trip there. I just loved it. And he said, well, where do you want to teach at? And I said, in Washoe County. I'm going to come back here and live. And he said, well, why are you going to move to California to get a Nevada teaching license? And so with that, because then he said, you're going to have to come back and do coursework in Nevada. So with that, you know, it gives better opportunities for pre-service education. Teachers will be prepared to be in a classroom anywhere in the United States. And also, you know, as the national companies prepare us, they'll have standards to prepare us as teachers for. And then there's 21st century, and again, they're embedded throughout. So a lot of people say, well, these Common Core standards are just English language arts and mathematics. So what about the old standards? Are we just throwing them out too? No, all the other standards for all of the other content areas are still in place. So social studies, science, PE, foreign world language, all of those subjects are still in place. They can be found on the Nevada Department of Ed website if you're interested in looking at those standards. However, because there's streams of literacy throughout the standards, they've incorporated pieces for social studies and science and technical subjects to work with the the English language arts standards. So if you're in a social studies classroom, you might think about writing for an argument or argumentative writing, which is a Common Core standard. So the social studies and science teachers can now participate in these standards also. But their content is still their content, and their standards are still, have not changed. So the, Mary showed this graphic from before, but most of these, is there a pointer here? Most of these right up here, these 3 C's that she had us do the hand motions for, they are weaved throughout the standards. They are in the mathematical practices, and they are in the college and career ready standards. In the English language arts, it's talking about writing for an audience. And one of the examples they give is creating a blog. So a lot of that technology is embedded in there. So here's what the website looks like. It's coursestandards.org. And even if you can't remember the website, just Google it. It's the first thing that shows up. And if you click right, whoops. Uh-oh. There we go. If you click right up here where it says about the standards, or right here where it says the Common Core standards, right there. There's a lot of places to get directly to that if you'd like to look directly at the documents. There's some really interesting things in there. They're quite lengthy read if you're an insomniac. There's some really interesting things to read about in there. But it is, I think, just a nice way to see what your students will be learning in school. So I guess it was last spring, we got together teachers from all over the state of Nevada, and we developed a timeline for rolling out the standards in our classrooms based on many things. What our students and teachers could handle based on that 2-year gap that Scott was talking about. Also based on our current assessments, based on that graph he showed where we have one foot on the other. The test could not change fast enough to keep up with us, so we had to do it. We call it kind of a slow roll. So with English Language Arts, it's this year. This is this year up here. You can see that we're doing, and it's hard to see, but you can see that we're, in K through 8, we're doing full Common Core standards in K through 8 in English Language Arts. So what this means is, if you have a student in K8, they may not be getting full Common Core this year because the teachers are really just trying to learn it and get to do it, and they're making a transition into making better choices about the standards they teach. And then in mathematics, it's only K2 that's being adopted full this year, where 3.8 is this slow roll. We have like a couple different strands rolling out each year because of the assessment, and because we knew that there would be gaps in students' learnings because of the way the standards moved around. So then next year, we have full Common Core in English Language Arts in K-12, which makes it really nice for the English Language Arts teachers and students to learn. But math, again, we're still in this awkward area where we'll add more standards on in 3.8 and high school starts on. So high school algebra, really your freshmen, high school algebra or geometry will be getting Common Core next year. And we've created those course guides and the curriculum, and it's ready to go for teachers for next year, and we will be offering training on that also. And then for the high school math, each year we add another grade level or another course on. So next year is Algebra 1 and Geometry. And the reason we had to do them both at the same time is because so many freshmen take geometry. We had to kind of waddle through that. And then the year after is Algebra 2, and then the year after that will be the 4th course standards. So for English Language Arts, some of the authors got together and said, really the standards will require a shift in instruction. So they created a document called the 6 Shifts, and it really just tells you, for me that's not an English Language Arts person, it gives me a great overview of what is changing in English Language Arts. So I'll go through the shifts with you, and then we'll talk about mathematics. So the first shift is, in elementary school, typically we read a lot of literary text, we get to novels, we read a lot of picture books, and that's what they're calling literary text. And so what they're saying is really we need to start balancing literary text with informational text more. So we need to add more newspaper articles and books about sharks and things like that are more informational, so students can learn from reading rather than reading for just like a novel. And so they're talking about balancing that more, not completely replacing it, just balancing it, including more of that. And you'll notice up into high school, you're up to 70% informational text. And really that doesn't all have to happen in the English Language Arts classroom, but they're talking about reading and social studies. But not just reading the textbook, reading things like the Declaration of Independence and some of those documents that are good historical documents that students could read. Reading journals in science, reading your technical manuals in your career and technical education courses, even reading a software manual, learning how to read those kinds of things in addition to reading novels in your English class. So you'll notice that's a 70-30 ratio there by 12th grade. And that's really to jump them into college and career readiness, because college textbooks are hard to read. I mean, I just finished college, I guess, a year ago, and some of those books are really hard to read and understand. And so if you have that readiness, you can read better. And also, I touched on this shift too a little bit about knowledge in the disciplines. Again, it's adding your science and your social studies back in and considering those within your reading. So I hear a lot from biology teachers, the 9th grade biology teacher, oh, the book is too hard for my students to read. And so we talk a lot about how you get kids to access that text. What can you do to help kids learn to read that text so when they get to college biology, they've read some of that text that gives them that information. So that's shift 2. Shift 3 is really interesting to me, mostly as a parent, because I watch my own kids learn to read. And if you think about a common way of measuring books is called a Lexile level. And it's the numerical version of where books are at. So an example of something you may have read, Hunger Games, is an 8-10 reading level. And so if you notice, under the old level, Hunger Games would be, you know, somewhere in here, and now it's still somewhere in here, but notice the difference between these grade levels. And as you get up into high school, look at the difference, because this 1355 is really, or actually the 1215 is really the level of college textbooks. So they're trying to prepare students to be in that range when they go to college. And so, but I want to caution you about that number, because it really should be a balance, because I use the Hunger Games as an example. And if you've read Hunger Games, you know that it's really not appropriate for most fourth graders. Some of the content is really rich, and for them to understand the deep meanings and things, they can't do it. My 4th grader just read it, and she's thinking about the little love affair that's going on in the background. She doesn't understand about the government issues and all of the things that's going on in the novel. So, you know, that's why, and the graphic kind of is off the slide over here, but they're talking about using a mixture of measures. You know, in data, when you look at data, you should always look at more than one measure to make a decision. And so that's what this is saying, is use the Lexile, use the other information about the book. And so in this high school run here, it's what I've heard my English language arts teachers talking about is to get to that text complexity level in high school would require really long readings. So what they're doing is reading shorter passages of more complex text. They're picking pieces and parts out of things to really dive into that and learn it deeply, rather than reading, you know, these huge novels that are super complex. They read smaller things, and they'll still read those novels, but to really get to that complexity level, they'll read shorter things that are more complex to really dive in and understand. So that's text complexity. Then the next one, which goes along with text complexity, is text-based questions and non-text-based questions. And so typically, if you sit in the classroom, you hear the teacher talking to students about what they've read is, you know, if you're talking about flying a kite, who's flown a kite before? So they try to make those connections to themselves. Well, this shift is saying we're moving away from that to being the only way of engaging in a text, to be engaging in how you can use the text to answer the question. So I picked, you can tell my family's a little obsessed with Hunger Games, so I picked some questions from Hunger Games. The one is a text-based question. And most of the text-based questions I've seen really talk about citing evidence to support your thinking. And then you can see over here, even if you haven't read the book, you could probably guess what's going on in the ceremony. It's like an Olympic ceremony, and you could, if you've watched the Olympics on TV, you could probably answer that question. So that's the point, is really you could answer this question without ever reading the text. And that's what's happening a lot, is kids will say, oh yeah, I've flown a kite, but who knows what happened in the text about the kite. And if you're a parent, I encourage you to try this with your students or with your own children. We have a long commute sometimes to go to things, and my kids read a lot in the car, and so I'm always asking, my youngest reads out loud. So I'm always saying, well, why do you think that? And so I try out things on her. She doesn't know she's a guinea pig, but I try to write some of these as I'm driving, and it's really difficult to come up with them, but I'll say, can you tell me in the book where you found that or why you came up with that idea? And it's just kind of fun, you know, it's what we find fun, but it's kind of fun to play around to see where her reading and how she can figure out what the answers are. And also for me as a teacher to have to come up with those questions and to see how difficult it will be if the teacher doesn't pre-plan these in advance you know, for her to work with students around these. So I encourage you to try this as you read with your own children at night or whenever you read with them. Shift 5 is writing from sources, and this little graphic right here is right from the Nevada Department of Ed what our new writing test will include. And I don't know if you can see it, but it talks about it being a stimulus rather than a prompt, and it includes using the information to write the response. In the past, I think I still remember my writing test in high school was, you know, name a rule that your parents had that you didn't agree with and what happened as a result of that. And I've seen that kind of recycled through the years. Well, those kinds of questions are no longer really, I mean, I think that they'll still be included, not necessarily an assessment, but they're still important things to write about. But for our assessments, this is the kind of thing that will be included on our assessments. So they'll have some kind of stimulus and they might have to compare things. And it might not necessarily just be reading. It could be graphs or pictures to do some comparisons as they read. And Paul will probably talk a little bit more about that since that's his favorite topic. And then academic vocabulary is really a big shift, is using the academic vocabulary. Especially with our English language learners, it's really important to use the words that they need to know for academics as they learn. And so that's the last shift. We kind of candy code it sometimes and use smaller words or different words, but this is really saying we need to use the academic words as we teach. So that's the English language arts shifts. Now into my favorite topic. Mathematics, and these are just the overarching ideas about mathematics, about how we're going to ideally change practice. We'll use some technology, and really for us in Nevada, it's a new focus on geometry and measurement. So I'll give you an overview of the K2 math, because you might see some information about shifts in mathematics, but it's really not about the content, it's more about instruction and how we need to focus on mathematics and how we really, if we start something, we need to figure out what it looks like all the way through. So it's not as glaring in mathematics, so I really just kept to the content for you. But K2, really they're talking about measurement and three-dimensional shapes and starting that number sense and really working on those facts. Then in 3.5, we really focus on fractions. We get a solid foundation of fractions. And if you are familiar at all with the Nevada standards, you know that fractions start in really, you could argue that they sort of start in kindergarten based on number, on pattern blocks and things, but really 3rd grade, but then they're taught again in 4th, and in 5th, and in 6th, then guess what? We teach them again in 7th and 8th. And then when they came to me in high school, guess what? They couldn't do fractions. And so what this is saying is really we're going to focus on fractions and some geometric shapes and some other things, but really the focus in 3.5 is learning fractions and learning them well. So when we get to 6.8 and then 9.12, we can do some things with those fractions. So in 6.8, we start with algebra. Proportional reasoning and ratios is really important, and if you're familiar with ratios, you know that that's really fractional, reasoning. And so, but the idea is that students will really be prepared for algebra in the 8th grade. And if you look at the 8th grade standards, it's probably very similar to the algebra you learned in high school. Some of those concepts are exactly the same. So things have shifted around a little bit. The new algebra that we'll be learning is bumped up quite a bit, or actually bumped down because it's a lot deeper. Then really the focus of 9-12, which I would love to go back and be a classroom math teacher again with this kind of situation, because you could really do some amazing projects. You could use all of that math that they learned to really, those statistical projects and things that students could really engage in and find interesting, the things that they'll need in their real life. That's the mathematics that they're learning in high school. And these standards are 9-12, which is a difference from what we have right now. Right now we have 9, 10 standards, and they kind of end abruptly. So these really take us all the way through our senior year and hopefully create college and career readiness. They're exciting to me. I read them all the time, and I don't know. I get excited about that. So in the past, we had NCTM process standards, which really taught us the processes about teaching mathematics. And these are kind of integrated with that, but these are the standards for which students, these are the math practices which students will engage in order to learn mathematics. So they're going to make sense of problems, they're going to reason, they're going to make arguments about mathematics, they're going to model, they're going to use tools appropriately, which is an important thing. We don't want students, we love the calculator. There's so many great things you can do with it, but we don't want them adding 2 + 5 on the calculator in life. Really, those are the kind of things that should come to them. Attend to precision and make use of structure in mathematics. So looking for patterns, this is where patterns came from, and repeated reasoning. And so if you took the wording, there's a lot of really great wording behind each of these math practices. If you took that and created a visual out of them, this is a Wordle. Are you familiar with Wordle? I took all of the text and I put it in a Wordle. And so what a Wordle is the larger words are the ones that show up more often. And every standard for mathematical practice starts with the same text. Mathematically proficient students will. And every single one of them starts with that. And so part of the reason that's why students proficient in mathematical show up so often. But you can see in that Wordle the cool mathematics that arises out of that. And nowhere in there do you see anything about teaching. It's all about learning. It's what the students will do to show that they've learned mathematics. So that's kind of exciting. And I like that visual. So just a quick last overview about the standards. They don't tell you how to teach. And I really think that these standards will allow teachers to have their creativity back. A lot of times I go observe teachers and I say, well, why don't you try it this way? And they'll say, I'm teaching from this, I have a script, or whatever, not necessarily all the time, but sometimes you get that I've lost my creativity feeling from teachers. This really gives them a chance to be creative again, because they can link standards, they can do language arts, and math together. They can do a lot of things differently than they have for the last several years. They just define what can and should be taught, but not everything. And that's only in math and ELA. And it doesn't define interventions. It doesn't help us. The standards themselves don't tell us where students are at. That's where the assessment come in. And they don't, at this point, give us a support for our English language learners or our special ed students. However, that's coming. So the English language learner piece is already in place, but then we're working on how we support our special ed students, because they'll still be responsible for the same standards. And then it doesn't provide everything they need. I mean, I remember I was here for the Bernie Trilling talk, and it was wonderful. And one of the things we did, we listed all of the skills that were college and career ready, or college ready or career ready or something. And they were just, the list was huge, if you remember. And so not all of those things that we listed here in this room are in these standards, but quite a lot of them are. So with that, I think we moved to just some resources for you if you're interested. The core standards page that I showed you earlier. Also, there's a wonderful website. It's a YouTube site. It's the Hunt Institute. The videos have really good content. They're just not super exciting. It's one of the Common Core authors standing in front of a white wall talking to you about the standards. But there's a lot of good information for it if your ADHD doesn't set in when you're halfway through the video. But there's some really good information, and there's some parent pieces in that on that YouTube site. Also, the National PTA site has parent guides for every grade level, and our parent and community education department is printing those up for the schools, and the schools should have copies of those. So if you're a third grade parent, you can get one of those copies that shows exactly what your child should be learning. And also on our curriculum and instruction webpage, we have a lot of resources for both teachers and parents, and the plan Scott was talking about is posted there. There's more information about the shifts. There's some really good resources for just anyone who's interested in learning more. So with that, I will pass it on to my colleague.